Welcome to show 8 of the Cyber Incision live stream named Cutting into Cybersecurity, or CIC, as you can see above. This episode is a continuation of our CISSP study group for the CISSP certification, where we're going to be digging into each and every domain and give you examples that you'll remember that are also real world. Now, for those of you who don't know us personally, I am Joel Bork, and I'm a senior threat hunter at IronNet, and also the host here at the Cyber Incision live stream. Now, I'm joined by not just my co-host, but a friend. He is a senior account executive over at Usato. Brandon Krieger, thanks so much for co-hosting with me, buddy.
Oh man, this has been awesome. I mean, we're at show 8. I mean, we're learning so much just from our notes and everything we're doing with live streaming and studying the CISSP. This has been amazing. Awesome.
Well, cool. I want to give shout outs to those who are joining us live. Thank you guys for joining us. If you could please, in either the give us the hand claps or a thumbs up, let us know you're live. Some of us were giving us hearts on a hand already. I'm cool with that. Just spam that a few times so we can see that you guys are live with us, and we'll do the same. So thank you for joining us. Now, before we get into this week's content, I typically turn it over to Brandon for our 2-minute recap of last week. Brandon, you ready to do that this week?
Yeah, well, before we do any housekeeping, because I think one thing we got to mention, if you're watching this on LinkedIn or YouTube, because you might not be able to see the claps or that on YouTube. If you're watching us on YouTube, give us some likes there. Comment. 1, let us know where you're from. And 2, where are you on your CISSP journey? Yeah. Right? Are you a CISSP right now and practicing, or are you studying right now and working for the exam? Put that in the comments, because we like to kind of know, who we're talking to and just, be able to provide more value.
That's it. And we're also streaming out to Twitch as well. So for those of you on Twitch, thanks for joining us. We appreciate you.
Oh, for sure.
Cool. Brandon, you ready? Let's do a quick recap, maybe not even 2 minutes, but talk to us about what we dug into last week.
So last week we covered the identity, analyzing, prioritizing the business continuity requirements, development document scope, plan, and business impact analysis.
Yeah, absolutely. Now this week we're really digging into impact assessment and then also business continuity. So we got a lot of content. We got a little math, some equations you're going to have to learn tonight, because I can almost guarantee you that they're going to show up on the CISSP exam. It's also good information to know as you move into a more director level role. So you ready, Brandon?
Oh, for sure. Let's go.
Awesome. Cool. Impact assessment is up first. Now, as you may have figured out by now on its name, the impact assessment is one of the most critical portions to the business impact assessment. Now, in this phase, you're going to analyze the data that's been gathered throughout your risk identification and your likelihood assessment, and then you're going to try to determine what's the impact of each of these risks on your business. So from a quantitative point of view, we're going to cover 3 specific metrics. So you have your exposure factor, you have your SLE, or your single loss expectancy, and then you have your annualized loss expectancy, or your ALE. Now, each one of these values is computed for each specific risk or asset combination evaluated during your previous phases.
Now, that's a lot of information to cover right at the start. So what's the importance of those, Joel? Like, just on kind of a high level.
Yeah, so I mean, we're going to dig into all those here in a minute when I flip over. It's cool because we've been evolving this live stream, so we got some content for you. So I can flip over real quick and show you, but before I do that, I want to talk about, we have a few comments. Now, Brandon and I, we're both studying for the CISS live stream. We're studying for the live stream right now, and before this, but we're studying for the certification. We're looking to get it before 2021. So end of calendar year this year. We're looking to cover as much content as possible and do a couple crash courses here at the end of this to get certified. It looks like Emmanuel, welcome, buddy. Thank you for being here. I'll give you a couple claps. Looks like he's slowly getting back into studying for the CISSP after passing his CISM.
Nice. Congratulations.
Yeah. And thanks for joining us, everybody. So cool. Let's go ahead and talk about, here we go, the importance of this. So once you've assigned your asset value, then you have to calculate your exposure factor. Now, once you calculate your exposure factor, this is the risk your organization could have. Then we got to talk about single loss expectancy. What happens if, you do experience this loss? Then you have to go into assess the annualized rate of occurrence. So how many times per year will you see this? And if it's not on a per year basis, then you're going to have a percentage or a decimal for your ARO, because it might only happen once every 10 years for that specific risk. Then you have to derive your annualized loss expectancy, and then from there, perform cost-benefit analysis.
Exactly.
Cool. So we're going to start back up there with that exposure factor. Brandon, you want to talk to us about that for a bit?
Yeah, I mean, the exposure factor is the amount of damage that the risk poses to the asset, expressed as a percentage of the asset's value. For example, if the business continuity plan team consults with the fire experts and determines that a building fire would cost 70% of the building to be destroyed, the exposure factor of the building to the fire is 70%.
Have you ever had a building burn down just 70%?
No, I don't think. Well, actually, I start to say that, but yeah, I've seen buildings that have been partially burnt down.
Okay.
Certain of the foundations, certain of the walls, things like that, still are standing through the fire.
Okay.
It's not 100% destroyed, but but again, when they're looking at the total loss of damages, and I think it's more qualitative as they're looking at financial.
Yeah, that's fair. Now, I want to give a little bit different example. So here in Maryland, we have a city called Ellicott City, and it's basically a town built on a hill. And when it rains, it gets massive amounts of rain. And at the bottom of this hill is a big river. And that river's been known to flood a lot. Right. It's had like 200-year floods in the last 7 years. So they should probably rename that type of flood. But basically the bottom floor of your business floods out almost guaranteed, right? It wipes out all your inventory, everything. So your exposure factor would probably be 50% of your assets if you're utilizing 2 stories of a building. So you would have to calculate that exposure factor for the risk at hand.
For sure. Yeah, that makes sense.
Now, Brandon, we got an interesting, so Salome isn't studying for her CISSP. She's studying for her Security Plus. Do you have your Security Plus?
Yeah, I actually do have it.
Now, I know the answer to this, but do the concepts we're studying here apply towards the Security Plus?
Some of them do. The Security Plus, as they're studying, it's a lot more definitions on the actual technical aspects, and then knowing, like different breaches, like if banner exploits, SQL injections, things along that line, and understanding the basic definitions when it comes to all your cybersecurity, looking at pen testing, infrastructure, so penetration testing, vulnerability assessment. I'm just trying to think. It's been a while since I've taken it, but they go through all the kind of the basic definitions you would need to know as a security professional starting out. Mm-hmm. And then from there, then it dives into different, you have to know policies, procedure, governance, a little bit about that. I know a lot of my tests when I was doing it, majority of it was on the actual technical side of understanding phishing attacks. And they have to know the definition, what's a phishing attack? What's simming attack? What's, all these different types of attacks, and you had to know the definitions of it. So in the CISSP, we really don't cover that.
Well, I remember BCP being a question on the exam, an answer on the exam. So
yeah, and that's what I said. Some of the policies, mm-hmm. But I know they were diving deeper when I just took it. I think it was a year or two ago. They were really diving into the technical, like knowing a phishing, knowing simming, knowing kind of all the different types of SQL injections, and what does a SQL injection look like? You don't have to know how to do it, but what does it look like?
Now, I recommend you do it at some point because it's fun to do, especially when you learn it. But Salome, so recapping what Brandon said, this is going to give you a lot of context for the Security Plus, but there's a lot of more red team, blue team specific data you're going to have to know. This is going to be great context for once you get that Security Plus, because I'm sure you will if you're listening in here, and then move towards that CISSP.
Yeah, get that next level. Because I think what happens is, and as you know, Security Plus is a great starter, mm-hmm. but then it's now what's next, and then what's next, right? So like us, we're always kind of looking at what's the next exam.
Yeah, and then it looks like Ayana Justice just said starting bachelor's in cybersecurity in January. Some of this seems a bit intimidating. Yeah, that's a great point, and some of it is, but I'm going to tell you right now, Ayana, congratulations on starting your journey. It is going to be intimidating, but man, is it worth it. So don't stop your journey.
Well, the good thing is, and tell that, take a deep breath, take it in chunks. I mean, one of the analogies someone gave it to me is how to eat an elephant, right? One bite at a time, right? So take each bite. It's going to seem overwhelming right now. As you get into it, it's one of those things too. And I want to give people an analogy, and guys chime in, all you guys that have been in cybersecurity, you start to learn one thing, you think, yeah, I've got this. And then someone goes, oh, by the way, what about this? And now it's like, oh my God, there's another elephant in the room, right? You're like, oh my God, how am I supposed to do that? As you get through this, you start to get comfortable about, lots of elephants in your room, and you just take one at a time and just keep going through it.
How many elephants are in your room?
Oh, too many. Too many. Well, I mean, being an account executive, you're always dealing with different types of technology solutions and different strategies. So it's always what's the newest thing you have to learn.
And the nice part is in cyber, like every 2 years, we've come a long ways. The tools have changed. So no matter where you end up, guys, they will have to train you on the technologies they want you to use. And that's the reality. And as long as you can crunch your learning curves and you can learn technologies quickly, that's what that bachelor's degree hopefully teaches you. Allow yourself to learn new technologies quicker and quicker as you go throughout that degree.
Well, and I hate to say this about degrees. It's going to be good until you get into the real world. And then what happens is you're going to have to kind of catch up to what's going on in the industry, because a lot of times with degrees, and I found this with college and university as I talk to people, they try to stay up with the trends, but they write their curriculum ahead of time. Mm-hmm. Right. And it's not like, as we know, AI technology and machine learning and all that's coming out, and that changes the industry, but they might be a little bit behind in what they're learning. So give yourself patience and time. You've got a foundation, and now it's what's the differences, and then kind of build on that.
That's it. Now, Emmanuel also said he went for the CISSP back in January and he failed it, but then he went and took the CISM and was successful. Congratulations, Emmanuel. And he said, any tips on how to get back on his feet? That's why we're here, right? We're getting back on our feet and we're studying on it. Brandon and I, we're going to hold ourselves accountable to be here every single Tuesday, 7 p.m. Eastern Standard Time for you guys. So please join it. Put it on your calendar. Make yourself a reminder. Jump on this live stream, guys. And right now we're going to pivot back. But please, guys, ask questions. If you have comments, if you guys have context that you've received at your job right now that you can give to the conversation, please put it in the chat below, guys. So you ready to get back to it, Brandon?
Let's go at it.
All right, cool. So we talked about exposure factor. Now we're going to talk about single loss expectancy. So we're on that third bubble down, and I got a new graphic. So are you able to see that? Yep, perfect. So what we're talking about is your single loss expectancy is how much you expect yourself to lose in an event occurs. This is going to be your asset value times your EF. Do you remember what the EF is?
Exposure factor, right?
That's it. And we just talked about that, right? So if you have a building worth $1 million and your exposure factor is 0.25, so maybe 4 floors high, one of those floors could be impacted by that specific threat. That's 0.25. What is your single loss expectancy? Well, asset value times EF. So 1 million times a quarter of that, 250,000 would be your single loss expectancy. Did I explain that well? How did I do?
Yeah. That makes sense. Now, guys, did you get that? I know Joel covered it really quick, and it's a concept you have to know. Anytime of the books I've seen, this is something they red flag. They tell you, look, you got to know this. All right. Yeah. This is something you write on your whiteboard or you have on your mirror in the bathroom that you look at every day. Keep going through this.
Now, when you really break it down and you like looking at this, it makes sense. So if you can remember, EF is going to be your exposure factor, and then your SLE is your single loss expectancy. You should be able to take, okay, I need to take the asset value times my exposure factor, right? And that will equal the cost if it happens a single time, right? So it really is, once you read through it and you understand what the acronyms are, guys, it's going to stick. It's going to stick. So Brandon, hit me with, actually, I got another example real quick. Let's do one more example. It's not on the slide, but now if your building is worth 500,000, the single loss expectancy would be 70%. Oh, just kidding. I deleted half of that. We're going to move on. Sorry about that. I deleted the first half of the question. So yeah, that's not going to be any value. So let's go ahead. And when we take back to qualitative, our qualitative analysis here, you can see SLE is the third bubble down. ARO, or your annualized rate of occurrence. So remember what I talked about that. If it will happen once a year, your ARO is 1 or 100, right? So basically 1. If it's once every 10 years, it's 0.1. And then we're going to jump into the annualized loss expectancy. Take it away, Brandon.
Well, which is the monetary loss that the business expects to occur as a result of risk harming the asset over a course of a year. You already have all the data necessary to perform this calculation, which we're talking about right now. So the SLE is the amount of damage you expect each time a disaster strikes. And the ARO, which Joel was just talking about, is the number of times you expect a disaster to occur each year. You compute the ALE by simply multiplying those two numbers. So the annual loss expectancy is equal to SLE times ARO. So single loss expectancy times the annual rate of occurrence.
That's it. Now, we did have a question real quick. That was a great explanation. I want to come back to it. Emmanuel asked if we both have our CISSP.
No, we're students.
We're students.
We're students like everyone right now, and we're going through this like you guys are right now, the ones who are studying.
That's it. Yep. So we're studying with you guys.
Yeah. So to give you guys the concept, and anyone that's just watching this and trying to get an idea of like what we're doing, we're actually studying live with you guys. So all this information, everything that we're taking in, we're actually studying live. So we're going through this live and talking about our real world situations of what we deal with day in and day out and how to apply this from what we know, and then getting your guys' feedback. So that's why, we're doing this every Tuesday.
Now, the other thing is, to piggyback off what Brandon said, a few weeks ago, we brought in an actual lawyer who had his CISSP and was a cybersecurity lawyer, Gaurav, and we were interviewing on him, and he actually went through the content with us and gave us real world examples. So for every domain, we're going to be trying to bring on a CISSP to give you that real world content. So welcome to the study group, guys. Awesome. So we were at ALE, and let's go ahead and pivot over. So couple examples real quick. Let's talk about ALE. This is your annualized loss expectancy. So not your single loss expectancy. This is your annual loss expectancy. So how much money would you expect to lose in a year? Not if it just happens one time, in a year. So you could have, for instance, if your warehouse fire SLE is 250 and you expect 2 fires a year, your annual is going to be your SLE, which you would have had to learn to calculate before, times your ARO, or your annual loss expectancy. So that means your ALE will be 500. So one really important thing to remember, guys, is you have to be able to calculate your single loss expectancy, which is the asset value times the frequency, in order to calculate your annual loss expectancy. How'd I do? Clarify on this for me, Brandon.
So just so you guys know, I mean, you're going to get a lot of formulas. So we're getting one formula again. You got the SLE is equal to AB times, EF, right? So you've got that formula to start off with that gives you the numbers for your single loss expectancy and then your annual rate of occurrence, which then gives you the annual loss expectancy. So again, you got to have these formulas kind of drawn out. So that's what Joel's going through right now is the SLE times your ARO. So you've already figured out your SLE, which is now you're bringing it down to this formula here.
That's it. Now, remember, guys, we are going to have to recap this before we take the exam, but this was just a quick brief in domain 1. I don't expect you to memorize this on the spot, but this is definitely going to be covered in our recap towards the end of this. And if you're watching now, feel free to take screenshots, right, and save it in a folder as CISSP study guide for you to flip through later. We're going to try to bring on pictures in the future. Whoop, lost my camera feed. Pictures for you guys to study with. Cool.
There we go.
All right, here we go. Back to us. Awesome. Oh, let's bring that down a bit. Awesome. So let's talk about qualitative points of view. Now, you're going to have to consider non-monetary impacts as well when you're doing this. And those are, for example, you're going to want to consider the following. And let's go back and forth on these, Brandon. Now, the loss of goodwill in your client base. So some risks, like if you have a data breach and you lose PII, those risks are going to have loss of goodwill among your client base. What else, Brandon?
Then you got the loss of employees to other jobs after prolonged downtime. So again, I mean, if you're down, right? Look at the pandemic. Prime example, right?
Yeah.
Right. Loss of employees to other jobs or after a prolonged downtime. Right now, you might be losing employees just because of the pandemic, right? Layoffs, cost-cutting measures, things along that line.
Well, we closed a couple offices permanently, mine included. So a lot of the employees who were at that office, if they really have to go into an office, they don't have that option anymore. So we did lose some people, right? So prolonged downtime, or even people having to stay up. Like we got a couple guys who are like, they're not single points of failure, but man, these guys are good. And when stuff goes down, they are working late nights. So,
yeah. So luckily we haven't had to deal with that, knock on wood, because our business has been doing really well. We've been able to maintain our staff and be able to do that. I mean, the only thing we had to do is transition to remote work, but other than that, we've been good.
Yeah. So we got a couple other non-monetary things to consider, or impacts to consider. The social and ethical responsibilities to your community for specific risks.
Talk a little bit about that. Yeah, talk about a little about that.
Yeah, I was trying to think about this one. How about you guys? Do you guys have any examples of how a specific risk could have a social or ethical responsibility?
Pay your charity.
We could talk about ransomware.
Oh, actually,
yeah.
In Vancouver, I saw this on the news yesterday. They have these areas where people do, like, safe areas for people to do heroin and kind of do safe needles.
Did you say safe area for people to do heroin?
Yeah. So what happens is they can get clean needles, and they have people that monitor them when they do drugs, and kind of, in a safe space so they don't OD. But their ethical responsibility is a lot of these shelters that they would be able to do it in closed doors would have been closed down because of the COVID pandemic, because of social distancing and all the costs. So now they're having to setting up in different areas. So their social ethics right now, and the responsibility for the community, is because now you have all these people that are doing drugs or roaming around. So they're trying to get them into a central area.
Wow. That's a great example.
There's an example. There's an example of that.
Yeah. And then another one would be negative publicity, right? So talk about airlines, right? When the airlines, they hit COVID, right? This was a risk. A pandemic is a risk. And for airlines who weren't leaving that middle seat empty, they took a lot of negative backlash and negative publicity on it. So, how are you going to respond to it? Is it in your business continuity plan? You have to take those into account.
Right.
Now, it's difficult to put dollar values on these though, right, Brandon?
Exactly. And I think that's the key point is here. You estimate, look at quantitative and qualitative, figures, but you have to estimate this because you don't know the actual impact, because, brand equity, your sales numbers, things along that can be impacted, and you don't know if it's 10% of your revenue, 25% of your revenue, 50% of your revenue. You don't know the impact until it actually happens.
Yeah. Like, take the goodwill against your client base, right? You may not know the total dollar amount, but if you burn the bridges with all your clients, I'm going to assume you're not going to have a business to return to after that risk.
Exactly.
Right?
Yeah, exactly.
Cool. So the next step is resource prioritization. And this needs to be planned for, because people are resources, time is a resource, money is a resource. So what's the final, this is the final step of the BIA, right?
It is, and it's prioritizing the allocation of business continuity resources to various risks that you identified and assessed in the preceding task of the BIA, so the business impact analysis that you're doing, right? That you want to make sure that you have, like you said, you have all your resources.
Yep. And it's pretty straightforward, right? So for your resource prioritization, if there are questions on the exam about it, really what you're going to do is you're going to create a list of the risks you analyze during this business impact analysis process. You're going to sort them into descending order based on your annualized loss expectancy. And this is going to provide you with a prioritized list, right? So if you have to do resource prioritization, it's based on an annual basis. And then you're going to work down from that. And eventually you're going to reach a point once you've exhausted your resources or the list of risks, which is probably unlikely, right? So you have to prioritize it, allocate your resources. And when you run out, then you have to get somebody to sign off and accept that risk in case it happens. You may not have the resources.
So a lot of times when you guys are thinking about this is what they call as forecasting, right? This is what they'll identify as you're forecasting your yearly budget, your annual budget for the year and what you need. And then through all this, calculations and planning, you're forecasting what you need.
Yeah.
Now, before we move on, I know we've covered a lot of information right now. Do you guys have any questions? All right. Comment in the comment field. Let us know. Cause we've just downloaded kind of a lot of information. Yeah. Now, Joel, how important do you think this is right now? Like in our era right now, what we're going through in 2020, how important do you think this is?
Could it be more important? The funny part is people forget about their BCP and the impact analysis until something big happens. And I know for us, like It was crazy. We actually did a tabletop exercise, and a pandemic was the one we prepared for in 2019. Like, what are the chances? Slim to none, but we did. And then it occurred, and it was crazy. We executed and delivered, and it was really cool to see. Now, a lot of companies that didn't do that, guess what? They're revisiting right now.
Right. Oh, yeah.
Because they just scrambled. They may not have had the resources. They may not have had the technologies or the failovers or the backups in place. And now they scrambled. They're finally settling back down. And now they're addressing the impact. They're redoing the impact analysis. They're redoing their business continuity plan, because now they may have closed offices and now they're more remote. So the impacts to business are different. When Azure goes down, or Slack died on me yesterday, right? Slack went down. What's the impact to your business, and what's the acceptable risk you're willing to take, and the downtime you're willing to accept?
Exactly. Now, Sean, and thanks, Sean, for jumping on. He just actually made a comment. We're discussing qualitative risk analysis. Many times one would perform qualitative risk analysis using a risk analysis matrix. This is covered in the risk management topic and risk management concepts in the book. It's all about determining the risk and understanding the risk and putting a dollar amount to those risks. Also, we need to look at the business impact analysis. That's critical. So all great points.
Yeah, spot on. And by the way, for those of you who haven't met Sean Delane, guys, reach out to him. Does this say I'm not even connected to you, Sean? I'm going to change that right now. But if you guys haven't met Sean, he's been with us every single week. He's not just been part of the group and taking in content. He's been responding. He's been with us. He's been adding content and value. So guys, if you haven't connected with Sean, I highly recommend you do so. I'm doing so now. So Sean, welcome. Thanks again for joining us today.
Emmanuel asked a question here. He said, between qualitative and quantitative, or qualitative and qualitative risk, give me a second, between qualitative and qualitative risk analysis, which one will companies use to prove their maturity?
Such a good question. Can I take it?
Sure, go ahead.
Cool. So Emmanuel, that's such a good question, because typically you're going to see a company lean towards qualitative or quantitative, right? They're going to feel more comfortable with one or the other. One is going to be more numbers based. The other is not, right? To prove your maturity, you're going to use both. You have to, because some things won't be covered in the numbers, and some things won't be covered by just putting the potential risks to your organization, right? So proving the maturity of your organization, you have to use both types of analysis when doing BCP and BIA.
Yeah, so I want to just confirm with Emmanuel, did you mean quantitative and qualitative? Just to confirm, like, it said qualitative twice.
Oh, did I?
No, he did, not you.
Oh, got it. Okay.
Yeah, I just want to confirm, because I don't know if he's just talking about qualitative numbers and then the qualitative risk analysis, which is using those. Like, so
he
I
meant
just want
one
to confirm.
of each. He meant both. So did we get that answer out to you, Emmanuel? And heads up,
Perfect.
We are about 40 seconds ahead of you. So there's a little bit of a delay. So bear with us through that delay, but we'll try to get to those as quick as we can on the question. So tell us if we answered that question, Emmanuel. Happy to answer any follow-ups on that.
Yeah, he just confirmed it was quantitative.
Fantastic.
Yeah, and just to kind of answer that too, just to add a little bit, it's theory. It's kind of what you feel and how you can equate that to actual physical numbers. So when you're ranking those, it's like 1 out of 10, right? And then you're doing quantitative, it's 1 out of 10, estimated this is going to be low is 1, 10 is high. And this is where we're going to kind of feel that number, where, quantitative, the actual numbers, qualitative is the actual numbers. They actually have formulas, like what we're going through, then figures out exactly the numbers and percentages. So that's kind of the difference. And then you're using all of that to come together to make this the business impact analysis.
You got it. You ready for the next section?
Let's do it.
Let's jump in. So this is back to continuity planning a bit, and we're going to walk through, we touched on business continuity planning and the steps last week, but let's kind of touch on them again real quick. So you have a couple first phases. You have your project initiation. That's project scope and planning there. Then you get into your business impact analysis. We just touched on that. So the next phase is really recovery strategy, design and development, implementation, training, and then monitoring and maintenance. So this is the steps for BCP according to the CISSP. So this is going to be a good one to know.
Exactly. Yeah.
Cool. Now, in this section, so in this next section, we're going to talk about design and development. We're going to touch on, so recovery strategy, I believe we touch on later. Am I right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, cool. So let's go ahead and let me check real quick before I flip over to that guy. All right, cool. I'm going to flip over to this one real quick, and let's talk about this for just a second. So business continuity. It's used to maintain the continuous operation of your business, critical functions in the event of a disaster. Now we're going to talk about disaster recovery. The goal is to minimize the immediate effects, right? So having failovers, what's your acceptable downtime? What's the, and there were a number of formulas we went over in the past one. Usually it's IT focused, which is why it's a big portion of the CISSP. Then you have continuity planning, which is the methods and procedures for long-term outages and disasters. And it takes a broader approach. Now, here are the 4 main steps, and we're actually going to come back to the slide at the end because this is what it keeps touching on and saying, hey, you need to know these for the test, is these 4 main steps: project scope and planning, your business impact assessment, continuity planning, which is what we're going over now, and then approval and implementation. How'd I do?
You're good. Good.
Cool.
And guys, and make sure you take a screen grab of that. You guys have that. That's important to know.
Oh, you want me to go back to it for a sec? Oh,
nope.
Actually, be prepared. Stick with us till the end. I'll flip back to it then. How about that?
Sounds good.
Cool. All right. So talk about strategy development. So this is really the gap between your business impact assessment and then the continuity planning phases of your BCP development. So the BCP team, you've organized a BCP team. They're the SMEs of your organization. They're the ones responsible with the core aspects of your organization. And you have to bring those all together along with legal, HR, PR, right? And then all the core departments of your organization. And this is when you do your quantitative and qualitative resource prioritization exercises, determine which risks will be addressed by your BCP plan.
Exactly. And so full addressing all the contingencies would require the implementation of provisions, processes that maintain a zero downtime posture in the face of every possible risk. For obvious reasons, implementing a policy this comprehensive is simply impossible. So that's good to know too. And I want to put that in there, is that it's simply impossible. You do your best with what you have, and then it has to be dynamic. It has to be dynamic.
Well, and so you're not going to get, you're not going to have provisions and processes that maintain a zero downtime. You just can't. Like, look at COVID. Right. There was downtime all over the place. Zoom couldn't handle the traffic, right? But you try. You try your best to prepare so that you at least have something in plan. So when it happens, you might not even be at the organization anymore, but that next person will be able to pick up that BCP, run with it, and they will minimize the effects of that risk.
Exactly.
Now, it was funny because at the beginning of this next one, it says the BCP team should be able to look back at the MTD. And I was like, oh, snap. What was that acronym? MTD. So I'm going to ask out, can anybody in this crowd tell me what MTD stands for? I referenced it. Go ahead.
Now, before you answer that, give them a little bit of time to do that, because I know, like you said, we're a little bit delayed in the sense of the response.
Okay.
So give them about 40 seconds to respond to that. The MTD. Right. What does that acronym stand for? And you guys have been studying, or the guys in the industry, let us know what you think.
And I've been talking about it in this session, but I just haven't been referring to it with the correct acronym. So here we go. M as in Mary, T as in Tom, D as in David. It stands for the maximum tolerable downtime. Now, this estimate is created during the early stages of your business impact analysis, and it determines which risks are deemed acceptable and which must be mitigated by BCP continuity provisions. Now, and this is delayed, so the answer still may be rolling in here shortly.
It could be. We could get a stream of them coming in. Right. And some of the decisions are obvious, right? The risk of bizarre striking on an operation facility in Egypt is negligible and would be deemed an acceptable risk. Yeah. The risk of a monsoon in New Delhi is serious enough that it must be mitigated by a BCP plan provision, right? So again, just kind of understanding scope, right? And the level of impact.
Well, let's take that back. So what is your risk of a blizzard striking in Egypt, right? So when we talk about that, give me just a moment. We have our annualized loss expectancy. If your annual rate of occurrence, or your ARO, is 0, you may leave that off your BCP together. And it looks like Christine Bacoy had the right answer. Congrats, Christine. I wish I had like a gift card or something. Maybe we'll do that one time.
I think we could do that. Yeah.
I could do an Amazon gift card one time. What we'll do is we'll put the question, we'll do better. We'll put some questions up and we'll have a little prize for those who are on here one day. But yeah, so talking about Egypt and a blizzard, not going to happen, right? Or slim to none. You probably would leave that off your BCP, right? It would be deemed an acceptable risk due to the ARO being so low. But the risk of a monsoon, right? You're definitely going to want to plan for that.
Exactly. No, totally makes sense.
Now, once your BCP team determines the risks that require mitigation and the level of resources, that are going to be committed to each mitigation tasks, they're ready to move on to the provisions and processes phase of the business continuity planning. So give me just a second. Let me get back here. And let's push it over. Cool. And so that is provisions and process. And that's going to be your implementation, I believe, correct?
Right.
So the provisions and process of the continuity planning is the meat of the entire BCP, which is really going to be your plan, design, and development and your implementation. Now, in this task, the BCP team designs the specific procedures and mechanisms that are going to mitigate the risks, right? So this is planning, but also your implementation of it. The three categories of assets that must be protected through these provisions are people, buildings and facilities, and infrastructure. I'm going to repeat that. Three categories that have to be protected through your BCP provisions in this order are people, buildings, facilities, and infrastructure. Now, in the next three sections, we're going to explore some of these techniques and safeguards you can use for these categories. Now, guys, we're gonna pivot back to people real quick. You have to ensure the people in your organization are safe. This has got to be your first priority. So when you're on the exam and it gives you the option, do you save the burning building or do you save the people in it first? Brandon, give me the answer.
Well, the burning building, of course.
The burning building, of course. I mean, it's got all your assets in it, right?
70%, right?
That's right. And your assets are there. I did the calculation on all my assets. You save the building. No, it's got to be people first.
Always people. We might be joking around, but it's actually come to people. And here's something that's relative to the pandemic. A lot of companies, when they were starting to go through this, they had to think about their employees, their clients, their staff. Like when we look at retail was prime example. They had to shut down locations, right? Literally close their stores, right? Because they had to look after people first.
That's it. And you got to remember, so these people are going to have to be provided with all the resources they need to complete their assigned tasks in the BCP. You got to prepare for that. At the same time, if the circumstances dictate that they are present in the workplace for extended periods of time, arrangements have to be made for shelter and food as well. And that's something we see often. People just don't bring into consideration, right? Now, these continuity plans that require these provisions are going to need detailed instructions for the BCP team in event of disaster.
Right.
It said this was the meat and potatoes of it, right? This is what we're talking about. It's going to require stockpiles of, sufficient enough to feed the operational and support teams for extended periods of time. The plan should specify the rotation of these stockpiles. I mean, this is the real deal. Depends on your type of business if you're going to need these or if you can send people home for an extended period of time. It depends on the type of business you have.
Exactly. And just to remind people, the security plan has to have adequate provisions for employees, customers, suppliers, and any other person that you deem that needs to be supported through that plan, right? You might have someone that's a contractor, anything along that line. You have to think that through. You have to make sure. And then when you're given that scenario, they might ask you that, right? You have a vendor, you have someone else, should you be looking after it? If the vendor's on site and he's working out of your location, you have to now potentially put them in that plan.
Well, let's kick this back over to our audience. Do you guys work at organizations who require people to remain on site or else things can't run? Right? Would you have to designate resources and supplies that were sufficient for operational and support teams to use a location for an extended period of time? Right? For us, we're in cybersecurity as an organization. We don't have to.
Right.
But what about you, Brandon?
So for us, kind of same thing. We can work remote. I mean, a lot of our service, and I'm just trying to think, anything that we provide right now can be actually run remote. So, I mean, we're 100% remote right now, which is great. We're able to do that. Now, I want to tell you guys a story. I know when I worked for the Ontario government, when I worked for the Ministry of Finance, when they went through the budget, the staff had to be on site 24/7 through the budget, where they actually stayed on location. So through that, they had to have housing, food, any type of, cosmetic or care like shampoos, soaps, access to showers, dry cleaning, whatever that may be. They had to have all that available to them because they had to stay on site because of the security of the budget.
That's it. Yeah, you don't think about laundry, do you? I didn't.
No. Yeah. But you have to think of and that's the thing, you had to think of it. And even the IT staff had to be, there because they had to support them 24/7.
Yeah. Well, and this is why it's so important to have the right people on your BCP team, because some people think about things in a certain way, and then others will have a different perspective based on their job role and their responsibilities.
Exactly.
Cool. Well, let's pivot over to buildings and facilities. So businesses require special facilities a lot of the time. These might include just your standard office, maybe a manufacturing plant, maybe an ops center, warehouses, logistics centers, repair and maintenance depots, and a number of others. Now, when you perform your business impact analysis, you're going to identify those facilities that play the most critical role in your organization and make a list of those. And your continuity plan should address 2 areas for each of those. Brandon, you want to take those?
Yeah. So one's going to be hardening provisions, right? Your BCP plan should outline mechanisms and procedures that can be put in place to protect your existing facilities against the risk defined in the strategy development phase. This might include steps as simple as patching a leaky roof, or as complex as installing and reinforcing a hurricane shutter and fireproof walls. They talk a lot about fire and fireproofing on this one, but again, you got to look at kind of what needs to be hardened.
Well, let's talk a few examples. We got a hurricane, 10th named storm hitting the Gulf or the United States. I forget. Never happened before in history. You got to have hardening procedures for the waves if you're impacted by them. Definitely the wind, even if you're not by the shore. And that's a hardening provision. Another one would be riots. Let's say you're in a big city, right? Especially right now, we have a lot of unrest throughout the nation. You got to be able to prepare for that. And I'm not sure if you watched any of the riots live. Did you watch any of them live on YouTube?
Yeah. Well, I mean, we get through our news, which is sensationalized, right? We get all of what's going on in the United States, because I'm in Canada.
That's
so
right.
We get a lot of stuff that's going on in the United States. So a lot of the riots, we see kind of this sensationalized of cars being flipped over and fires being done and, stores being broken into. But that's exactly what we're talking about.
Well, and I'm not going to lie, they sensationalized it, but that was real. They had reporters on the ground streaming to YouTube live, kind of like we're streaming to you guys here, but they were walking around and people had hardened. They had plywood up on their windows and people ripped it down, still busted in the window and went and robbed the entire Adidas store. That stuff happened. So what are better hardening measures? Or does the cost outweigh the risk? And then you don't take it. The other option is an alternate site. So in the event that it's not feasible to harden a facility against risk, could you allocate an alternate site where the business activities can resume immediately? For retail, probably not so much.
So let's talk a little bit about that with the pandemic.
Okay.
So alternative sites actually were not being able to be used in this pandemic. Right?
Yeah.
A lot of them weren't, because you had hot sites or warm sites that you can go to, but because of social distancing, you couldn't go there.
Yeah, they were too, right? That's crazy.
So just to put this in context, right? When you're looking at your business impact analysis and your business continuity plan, when you have to do that, some scenarios you have to look at your alternate sites. Can you actually use them? And if you can use them, do you have the protocols in place? Right now, if there's alternative sites that you can do social distancing in, that you have to go through certain protocols, maybe you can use them. But maybe if you're locked down, I know Montreal right now in Quebec, a lot of them are not locking down again. So what does that mean? Now they have to work from home. So now your alternative sites now might be work from home.
Yeah.
Now that's an alternative site.
Yeah, you're right. And can you do that for your company? Can you send everybody home? Is it do you have the infrastructure in place? Have you taken the appropriate risks? Emmanuel said those instances will be under the DRP, Disaster Recovery Plan, as it's more tactical. You're 100% right, Emmanuel.
You are. But again, when you're looking at the impact and the cost of it, it's in this as well. So it's kind of everything entitled, but you have to look at the actual financial, right? the process of, like, and he's saying, Emmanuel's right, the process of how it's going to be actually deployed and how it's going to be doing, for sure, it's a disaster recovery plan. But the financial of single loss expectancy, annual rate of occurrence, and the financial and the resources, all is going to be in your business impact analysis.
And the BCP continuity plan, right? So a lot of continuity is going to be in this plan. Disaster recovery is how do you bring it all the way full circle back to normal.
Right. And how do you do it? Right.
Key.
So here's the actual planning of it and your forecasting, but now how do you do it?
That's it. Now, remember, you have people, you have business locations. What was the official name? People, buildings, and facilities. And then you have infrastructures, the third one. So this is really, this is why this is in the CISSP book, is because infrastructure is typically the IT backbone today. It's amazing when COVID hit, how many companies could go fully remote because everybody's working on a computer. Everybody. You're in finance, you're on a computer. You're in healthcare, you're on a computer. Pharma, you're on a computer. Everybody's working on a computer. So the IT backbone is the communications and computer systems that are processing orders, managing supply chain, handling customers, and performing business functions. Even retail's on computers.
Yeah, it is.
That's the crazy part. Yep.
Point of sale units, and a lot of it's on SaaS, right?
Yeah. Now your backbone, yeah, you're right. It is. Now the backbone is going to consist for a lot of us, a number of servers, workstations, critical communications, right? So if you have your point of sale devices one place and your payment processing another, you have to keep those lines of communications open. And if not, you have to be able to accommodate for that. Now the BCP is going to address how these systems would be protected against the risks identified during the strategy development phase. Same with buildings and facilities. You have your Toonbane methods. Recap us on what those methods are, Brandon.
So are some of the methods of protecting them?
Yep. There's two. What are they?
Oh, you got me on that.
They're the same as the last one.
I was actually reading it.
You have physically hardening the systems, right? So you can harden the systems or alternate systems. So remember that. No matter which phase this is at, besides people, because you can't have alternate systems for people, but it's hardening the systems and alternate systems.
So yeah, physical hardening system. Okay, so yeah, you can protect the system against the risk of introducing protective measures such as computer safe fire suppression systems and uninterrupted power supplies. So yeah, no, that's a good point, Joel.
Yep.
And then I know when they're talking about that, like, having these in place, and I'm just kind of thinking, like, and I'm trying to relate this to our real world, what's going on right now. Some of those wouldn't even be in part of our plan right now.
Well, let's talk cloud.
Right.
Multiple availability zones.
Right.
You have to be able to have redundancy. Do you know how many organizations I know that have production level environments that aren't using multiple availability zones? A ton. A ton. And you got to think, okay, what if a massive event happens, like these forest fires get really out of hand and they hit a data center? If you're not in a multiple availability zone and that one goes down, now there are typically a couple data centers in an availability zone, so even AWS would have redundancy, local redundancy, but let's say it's a little more wide scale and all of that local redundancy is hit.
Right.
If you're not using multiple availability zones, you are in trouble. So you have to take that risk into account.
Right. Okay. No, makes sense.
Cool. All right.
So you want to talk about alternative systems?
Yeah, we could do that. This is more redundancy, right? So very similar. I was taking this more a cloud for alternate systems and redundancy, but multiple databases, backups, taking all those into account. So what if, a cold storage site, et cetera?
Mm-hmm. Well, and it comes down to what we're saying is really failover, right?
Mm-hmm.
You have failover, that alternative that can go. So in the pandemic, what we're talking about, like, you have cloud, you have VPN solutions, you have all that, and then the failover of that, and I know from some companies I've talked to, the expansion of their VPN, they had so many staff members on it that they had to have a failover because the initial license in this tool that they had didn't have the bandwidth to actually support the whole, company on their VPN solution.
Yeah. Yeah, that's an issue. Now, we had Christine say backup systems. Absolutely. And guys, we got about 12 minutes left. So if you're awake, click the clap button, thumbs up button, something on here. Let us know you're still awake with us. Thank you guys for joining us once again. And please, like, if you guys see people in the chat, click on their names, connect with them. That's what this is about. Let's connect with people who have similar goals to us. And we're going for the CISSP, guys. So let's come together as a study group. Let's connect and let's get the CISSP together. Deal?
Deal.
Cool. So back click on their name, click open in new tab, start connecting with people in this thread, guys, and let's get through this together. Now, we got about 11 minutes left now. Let's go ahead and hit on this last segment for today. Is that cool?
Yeah, that's cool. So plan approval and implementation, right?
Thank
you, everyone.
Thank you, everyone. Looks like people are still awake. Got some hearts going too. Good stuff. So plan approval and implementation. So you have your plan. You've done your impact analysis. You've mapped out the risks. You've gone through and decided whether you're going to physically harden, alternate systems, or both. And now you got to get it approved. So let's say this is your first time you've completed the design phase of your BCP document. It's time to get top-level management endorsement of this plan. Remember, you guys can't just make a plan and not get it approved by management and executive leadership. Now, if you have senior management involved, consider yourself blessed, right? Because it's going to be a straightforward process. Typically, at least the CISO should be involved, and then he should be able to take it to the board with the core members of the team to present it and get a stamp of approval. But if not, it might be a little more difficult. Now, if this is your first time approaching management, you're going to need to be prepared to explain yourself and the logic that you use to get to your BCP requirements.
Right, for sure.
Cool.
Right, and the budget and all that. And then, I mean, they talk about really, and this is what it comes down to, top down. The higher you go up for approval, the better the actual process is going to be for actually implementing and getting that plan approved and having it actually run through the whole entire company. You know, if you go a lower level, it keeps being harder and harder.
Yeah. And really, when you get executive leadership sign off, it showcases their commitment to business continuity as well. Mm-hmm. Come to them with the data, guys, because every time the people with the most data win. So if you have the numbers, if you've done your calculations, you present it in a logical manner, and you say, hey, this is how we're going to allocate our resources, it should be a no-brainer to them. Hey, here's our itemized list with our annual loss expectancy. There should be no question about it. Now, they may have a few questions for you, but you've already done the math. The data's there. Present it to them. Get their sign off. The signature of this individual on the plan, it's also going to give it greater weight. So remember, once you have a business continuity plan and you have these policies in place, it's going to give it credibility in the eyes of other senior managers across the organization who may brush it off as an IT initiative, right? It's just those darn security guys. Like, get out of here. I don't have time for that. You got the execs signing it. They're going to pay attention.
Right. And then once you receive approval from the senior manager, it's time to dive into studying the implementation of your plan. The BCP team should get together and develop an implementation schedule that utilizes the resources dedicated to the program to achieve this stated process and provision goals in a prompt manner as soon as possible, given the scope of the modifications and the organizational climate. After all the resources are fully developed, the BCP team should supervise the conduct of the appropriate BCP maintenance program to ensure that the plan remains responsive to evolving business needs. So this is where it says the dynamic, and we talk about this, staying dynamic, keeping going forward with the business.
Well, yeah, and it comes back to having a maintenance program. And maintenance program should really be a biannual or annual review. We did a poll last time, and most people review it annually.
Right.
And then test. So when we flip over real quick, let's take a peek at this. Remember, you plan and design and develop, you implement, and then you have training and monitoring and maintenance. So if you would have dropped off early, you have to remember that in the 4 steps of the BCP, you have continuity planning, approval, and implementation. Tucked into that implementation phase is training and education. So if you look at the bottom of this, for business continuity, your 4 main steps, approval and implementation. Within there is training and education. And you have to educate all personnel who are going to be involved in the plan. Directly, indirectly, doesn't matter. They should get training on the plan and their responsibilities. So if you have turnover in the company, that year you should circle back around and you should train those individuals.
Right. And it's so important because everyone in the organization should receive at least a plan overview briefing to provide them with the confidence that the business leaders have considered the possible risk posed to continue operations of the business and have put a plan in place to mitigate the impact of the organization should business be disrupted. So it's the confidence. It's not only just the plans there, but it's giving the confidence to the employee that the business is actually protecting them.
Yeah, you're spot on. And then when we get to BCP documentation, right? You have to be able to document it in order to be able to provide it to your employees to train them on it. So it's critical to have a way of dissemination, not just physical paper. Have it in a place that's easily accessible. Have it in a place where there's an annual reminder for those who have parts responsible for that, where they're notified, hey, it's time. Hopefully you have a little quiz or something for them afterwards on the different aspects of business continuity.
All right.
We had a quick question. Mind if we address it?
Yeah, let's go.
Emmanuel said, how many domains have you guys covered so far? He just added Tuesday, 7 p.m. for the CISSP. We made him pick up his books and he's ready to study. Whoop, whoop. Yeah,
there we go.
Hey, we're glad you're here, guys. Once again, we got 5 minutes left, but I want to give a clap to all of you guys who are studying with us. Guys, this test is not going to be easy. But guys, we can do it together. We're stronger together when we come together. It's going to make this content more memorable. And believe it or not, Emmanuel, we're still on domain 1. Now, it's one of the biggest domains, but we're on 1.7 and 1.8, right, Brandon?
Right, that's right.
Yeah, so we are most of the way through domain 1, so you're literally picking this up at the best time because chances are you've read the book and you've gotten through most of domain 1, and then when you got to domain 2, it was like, right? Or you just like in one ear out the other because there's so much text in this bad boy. So welcome. You literally came at the right time to jump into this thing and pass it with us.
Awesome.
Cool. All right, let's go ahead and jump down. So continuity planning goals. First, the plan should describe the goals of your continuity planning that has been set forth by your BCP team and senior management. These goals have to be decided on or at the first BCP team meeting, right? They're going to remain unchanged throughout the life of your BCP. So these goals, same with goals for us, right? We should set our goal. Timelines and certain things within the BCP might change, but the goal should remain the same. Our goal is to get the CISSP. That's not going to change.
Right, exactly. Right, so these are pretty simple. To ensure the continuous operation of the business in the face of an emergency situation. Others goals may also be inserted in the section of documents to meet organizational needs.
Hold on, say that one more time. Yeah. What was that?
So other goals may also be inserted in the section of the document to meet organizational needs. So this now is understanding your business requirements. So if you're in finance, if you're in health, what does the business need to maintain its, business continuity to be up?
So overarching goal, ensure continuous operation of the business in face of emergency situations.
Right.
But then you're going to have sub goals depending on your company, right? If you're healthcare, oh my Lanta, so the most recent UHS ransomware attack, those patients are number one priority, right?
Right.
So that goal is keep people alive, move them to backup sites, move them to alternate facilities, make sure those in the most critical needs get the care they need. So
now let's talk about that. So that could be the number one, ensure continuous operation of the business in face of emergency. So ransomware, patients have to be taken care of. We have to have all the sites up. But then also their other business goals could be, well, how do we manage the nurses, right? How do we manage the doctors? What's going on with their staff? So that could be secondary, right? For these other goals, right?
They had to roll back to using paper, right? What if they didn't have any paper printed off and their printers are locked up due to ransomware?
For sure.
You got to prepare.
But like we were saying, like the business continuity could be the first is that patient care is first.
Yeah.
Most critical. Well, then the other goals may be, for example, doctors maintain their schedule, maintain the nurse's schedule, understand what's going on. So there's could be other things that specific to the business.
Well, and you got to remember, right? So ransomware may be one risk, but server failures could be another, right? Do you have redundancy for that? Do you have backups? Do you have backup systems? Do you have backups of the data, right? How do you recover from these? And this gets into Manuel was talking about disaster recovery plans as well, but it's also business continuity, right? So these are really intermingled and a lot of similar characteristics.
For sure.
We got 2 minutes left. So do you want to talk about statements of priority or statement of, okay, let's jump through these statements real quick and then we'll wrap up.
Yep.
So statement of priorities are the priority flow directly from the identified priorities phase. We just touched on that, right? It's coming from the business impact assessment. The statement of organizational responsibility, this comes from senior level executives and can be incorporated into the same letter as the statement of importance. It's going to echo the sentiment that business continuity is everyone's responsibility, right? So BCP is you're going to have a statement of organizational responsibility. It's not just IT, it's the nurses, it's the doctors, it's keeping people alive, which is why we have to know it, we have to train it, we have to test on it. And then the statement of urgency and timing. Take that one away.
So then you got otherwise the list of priorities could be used for unintended purposes and results in political turf battle between competing organizations to determine the business continuity plan.
So that was back up a little bit. I jumped down. I was hitting each statement. So I'm 2 statements down. I just did organizational responsibility, statement of urgency and timing.
Then you got statement of organizational responsibility, statement of urgency and timing.
So hit that one for me.
Got that. The statement of urgency and timing expresses the criticality of the implementing of the BCP and outline the implementation timeability decided on by the BCP team and agreed by the upper management.
Yeah. So, okay.
That's a mouthful.
Yeah, that was a mouthful, but we've done it. What's the criticality? How soon do we need to implement this and train everybody? What are the resources required based on the period of time set? You should have a statement around that. And then the risk assessment portion, right? So you're going to have the risk assessment portion of the BCP documentation that's going to recap your decision-making process undertaken during your business impact assessment. Now, this is going to include a discussion of all the risks considered during the BIA, as well as your quantitative and qualitative analysis performed. So at the end, you got to bring it all back together. And that's going to be in your monitoring and maintenance side as well.
And that's where you bring the AV, EF, ARO, SLE, ALE, all those all together.
There it is. Right? So bringing all these back together, you got your asset values, your calculated exposure factors, your single loss expectancy, your annualized rate of occurrence, your annualized loss expectancy, and then your risk assessment.
Right.
For all of those. And then whether you mitigate or you accept the risk. And that needs to be signed off and approved for as well.
Mm-hmm. For sure.
Now, we did have a warning. Do you want to take that warning down here?
It's far too easy to look at a difficult risk mitigation challenge and say we accept the risk. Before moving on to the easier things, business continuity plans should resist these statements and ask business leaders to formally document their risk acceptance decisions. If auditors later scrutinize your business continuity plan, they will be certainly looked for formal artifacts of any risk acceptance decision made in the BCP plan process. So this goes back to due diligence, due care, right? And making sure the accountability on the upper management, because when they're signing off, they're saying we accept that risk.
Sean made a great point. Or transfer. It wasn't even in the content, Sean. Can you believe it? But yeah, he's right. You have to be able to accept it. This is an acceptable risk. Yeah. You have to be able to mitigate that risk, or you could transfer it via insurance, right? And then you have to take into account that, hey, we're willing to pay this amount of money to transfer that risk.
Or MSP or something along that line, vendor support. So yeah, the transference can be multiple forms of transference.
But there's also different risks associated with transferring it that then come into account. Now, then we got to talk about a vital records program, guys. I know we're over time. We're going to take 2 more minutes to wrap up this section, but a vital records program is basically outlining the vital records for your organization. It's going to state where they should be stored, how to get backups, how often those backups should be tested, etc.
Right. And one of the biggest challenges in implementing a vital records program is often identifying the vital records in the first place. As many organizations transition from paper-based to digital workflows, they often lost the rigors that exist around creating and maintaining formal file structures.
Yeah, that's it, right? You should have the formal file structure all the way down to the most minute detail in order to continue business, right? So then jumping down to the next one is emergency response guidelines. Mm-hmm. You're looking at me because I did just skip like 3 paragraphs.
Yeah, I'm watching.
Okay. As long as you're following, because there's a lot of content here, but we're touching on each point, and we're going to come back to them. we're giving it to you high level, but we're going to want to touch on these. So the emergency response guideline outlines the organizational and individual responsibilities for an immediate response to an emergency. Remember, this isn't disaster recovery, while some of it is going to be included in the disaster recovery. But guys, this is immediate response. You pull out the BCP, call this person, call your CISO, call emergency responder. What is the situation? What is your immediate response? That is in the BCP, in the emergency response guideline.
Yeah, and they give a little bit of a breakdown here of the immediate response. So immediate response procedures, security, safety procedures, fire suppression procedures, notification of appropriate emergency response agencies. Like those are ones, like you said, immediate response.
That's it. And then here's the deal, guys. Maintenance, right? When we talk about maintenance, when we talk about, I got the wrong one. When we talk about monitoring and maintenance, at the end of this, it's important to remember that this needs to be a living document. As times change, numbers will change, right? There are numbers. People get new cell phones. You will have to update this on a regular basis. It needs to be a living document where you train on it, you review it, and you make sure that your BCP team knows the plan.
Exactly.
That's it.
No, you're right. So let's leave off there. Let's not go any further because again, we're going to start to go into more information. But guys, thank you so much for sticking along. I know we've covered a lot of detailed information. Let us know what you think. I mean, we'd love to get your feedback. I know we're covering a lot of very, technical, dry kind of, process policies kind of information. We want to make sure you guys are getting them just because it's so important for the exam. You guys, and that's a wrap. Cutting into cybersecurity, show 8. You guys rock. That was domain 1.7, 1.8 for the CISSP certification, guys. Signing off till next Tuesday. Have a great rest of your week. Thanks, guys.